Beyond Clean offers a creative look into the inner workings of the healthcare industry committed to getting it right. Every instrument, every time. Join us every week as we explore the hidden world of one of the most important aspects of safe surgical care. And now your hosts, Hank Balch and Justin Poulin.
This week on Beyond Clean, we speak with Brian Reed, co-founder and CEO at Ascendco Health, on the topic of startup companies and big data in the sterile processing industry. And Hank, I know the last show was excellent, but I'm really keyed up on this one because just based on my area of expertise, surgical instruments is one that I'm very close to. Bringing big data and talking about utilizing tracking systems is an exciting topic for myself, and I know it is for you.
Well, that's right, Justin. At the end of the day, our sterile processing departments will always be a cost center, but there's no reason that they can't also be an epicenter of smart data management in our facilities. I would say that big data is just another one of those ideas that could really push our teams into the next generation of processing excellence and cost savings. So I'm super excited to talk to Brian today about that.
All right, well, let's just get right into it. Joining us now, Brian Reed, co-founder and CEO at Ascendco Health, on the topic of startup companies and big data in sterile processing. You know, Brian, I'll just tee this right up. I read your article from January. I believe you have it posted on your LinkedIn profile. 3 ways big data will ensure your sterile processing department is part of the digital transformation. I know Hank and I have been really excited for this interview, particularly because this is such a huge area of need all across the country. I mean, to that point, there are so many facilities today that still do not have an instrument tracking system, let alone all the amounts of data that's available to staffers in the operating room. So welcome to the show. Thanks for sharing your insights with us today.
Yeah, guys, thanks. Really happy to be here. It's great to see you guys creating, and I'm honored to be a part of it, and look forward to being a loyal listener and supporter moving forward.
Well, Brian, I want to welcome you again to Beyond Clean. And before we get into the data portion of this, let's talk startups. So this is a new company that y'all have created with Ascendco Health. What prompted you to get into the startup world in the sterile processing space in particular?
Well, Hank, I don't know that we're creating a startup in the SPD place. We're creating a startup that lives between the OR, between the sterile processing, supply chain, surgeons, and the suppliers. You know, all of these different groups have a role in making sure the right instruments are available. And if no one's providing a conduit for that information, then people will continue to work in silos, and the problem will continue to grow as it has for decades. So look, you know, surgery should be the most complicated part of care, and in today's world, that's unfortunately not always the case. If nurses have to go into battle before and between each surgery, then, you know, we can't expect them to give the patient their best when they're in the room. And so too often those issues ripple over to the doctor as well, the surgeon, and that's not okay because it's absolutely unavoidable. So that's why we're here, and that's why we're so focused on doing what we're doing.
So was there an event or a situation that was the impetus for you stepping out of a traditional vendor role into the world of data?
Yeah, I guess other than the fact that I always felt like a misfit in the corporate world and wanted to create and develop something for myself and create opportunities for other people. But really beyond that, you know, Hank, I helped open up hospitals all around the world in a position that I had, and I was exposed to a lot of inefficiencies. And, you know, when people are buying a large amount of instruments, it's like an enhanced reflection of what's going on in a daily basis. So I became acutely aware of the fact that the process around instrumentation was very, very manual, very arduous. But I don't think that was necessarily what did it. I think that everybody has a trigger. and that trigger was a personal one for me and our family. And that was when my mother went in just for a simple angiogram. And as she was sedated, I think we've all heard that the last thing to go is your hearing. And she could hear the surgeon saying, hey, arguing with the staff because they didn't have the right size catheter. So she could hear the doors opening and closing in the room, and she could sense the stress and anxiety. And a catheter was used that was a larger size catheter, and what it ended up doing was disrupting plaque on her wall, and that threw her into cardiac arrest. And she was resuscitated, but then on life support for over 2.5 hours because the hospital didn't have an adequate volume of surgical instrument trays, and they needed to reprocess their chest tray. And she had to wait on life support while that tray was reprocessed. So for me, that hit home, and it just signified to me that, it was actually time to step in and do something. And I think that everybody who takes a big risk or jumps and does something like this has a trigger beyond an awareness for something, and that was the trigger for us.
It's interesting because in sterile processing and in the OR, people are always trying to remind everybody that imagine if it was your loved one that's on the table. And I can, obviously that's a great motivator for you, and why you decided to step in and create this company. But it's also something that you can just never emphasize enough, that, the standard of care aspects to this, that everybody should be treated the same. I always laugh when I hear somebody say, oh, I'm going to come in and I'm going to do the tray for my uncle or my aunt who's coming in to have surgery, or I'm going to have surgery. So I want, my friend in sterile processing over there across the room to put my tray together and clean it. And that to me just, has always spelled, opportunity for improvement. But I wanted to jump back to something else that you said, Brian, which was you felt like a misfit in the corporate world. And I've had experiences in startup and privately held companies as well as corporate. To look at it from the positive side, what is it that you think that you can do that is unique for your customers by being in a privately held organization?
Well, we can be very nimble, and we can listen to our customers. One thing that we've been very careful, obviously, there's an element of fundraising that generally occurs when you are starting a company up, particularly in healthcare, because the decision-making process is such a complicated and lengthy one. You have to be extremely careful who you bring into your organization in the strategy stage, because you don't want to move into a situation where you're trying to rinse and repeat too soon, and you're not moving slowly and cautiously and listening to your customer. And I think that that's probably the biggest thing that we offer is we're very hands-on. We get involved deeply with our customers and to understand their issues, and we're tailoring things for them to help accelerate their initiatives. So the fact that we're in and on-site and hands-on and building and using our own software platform to drive the efficiencies, I think that's what really has been unique. And it's been so rewarding. I truly know that we're one of the most appreciated suppliers, if you will, or consultants when we're interacting with these hospitals, because we're in there solving their problems, and they recognize that we're not in selling a shiny box, but we're in there just listening and trying to solve their issues and make that solution sustainable.
So, Brian, from the CEO, co-founder perspective, then what has it been like to get this off the ground?
Yeah, as I mentioned, very hands-on and a significant commitment. Hank, when the company was at an infancy stage, you'd check on it all the time, just like you'd check on an infant sleeping to make sure it was still breathing, right?
Okay.
I would say we're now in the toddler stage, and I'm constantly chasing it around to make sure nothing bad happens. So it's all in all, it's an emotional process with its ups and downs. But you ultimately find out what you're really made of. I can remember a time where I met a gentleman out for dinner to talk business, and after I got home, my wife found me laying in bed in the cradle position because, I started talking too much, and it was very early on, and I shared with him my entire vision for the company, and I swore he was going to go take it and run faster than we could. Mm-hmm. But, of course, that didn't happen. And I've had times where I've been, sitting across a dinner table with our co-founder, Welsh Harris, and, we had just been beating a brick wall around optimization, and we had a major breakthrough. And, we stood up, and there was just a reaction to it. And, we yelled, yes, and everybody in the restaurant looked over at us. And, so here we are, we're just laughing. And that's something that we'll always remember. And every time, we get a call from a prospective client and they say that we're interested, there's such a great raw feeling and a feeling of responsibility associated with it. It's like, when you're growing your family, it means that much to you, and it's really been a great thing.
That's great, and I know a lot of entrepreneurs learn a lot about themselves in that startup process. But what have you learned about the industry that you're serving? Anything jump out at you, even from being inside this industry for a while now? You're coming to the front door of the sterile processing department with a different offering, and an offering that is possibly disruptive. What does that perspective look like for you?
Yeah, the industry is complex. Everything's linked together, and there's really no margin for error. There's razor-thin margins, and the operating room's driving over half of the hospital's revenue. So the decision-making process is so complex, and it involves so many people. But, we're just finding that you've just got to find the right people that understand what they need to drive their initiatives, and then be overly transparent about what you can do. And so that's been our approach, is to just sit down and talk and have a conversation, and try to avoid the presentations where everybody's sitting in the room with their hands crossed, and just talk about what they're trying to do and give examples about what we've done, show what we can do, and if you commit to something, you sure as hell better follow through with it. So we've just made an effort to keep it simple.
Yeah. Have you found a lot of hospital leaders who are willing to talk, to just have a conversation?
Yeah. So, we're not out trying to sell a solution to everyone. I've been in the industry for 15 years, and our COO and part owner, Jim Gain, has also been in the industry. And we're going out and talking with people that we've worked with in the past that know what our team can do. And so we're working with people that we trust and that trust us. And so we've found that people have been pretty receptive. And I think that it's become obvious that the best place to be is to help somebody do something in an automated way that they're already committed to doing themselves in a very manual way. And we found that if you're helping somebody do something they already have to do, they're much more receptive to it.
I gotcha. Great. So you and your company have been a great example of taking an idea and going someplace with it. You took a vision and now it's reality. What advice would you give an individual who thinks that they have a great idea in the sterile processing sphere, but they're not really sure what to do next?
Okay, great question. So I'm going to give you the first part of my answer is a very typical comment, and I guess it's typical because it's so true. You got to ask yourself why you're doing it, and you better be real with yourself, because you'll find out down the road. If you're doing it for financial reasons, the process will wean you out when you're putting all of your money into the business, right? Mm-hmm. If you're doing it to fuel your ego, well, you're going to give up when you meet humiliation, and you inevitably will.
Okay. That is, I got to jump in on that. Brian, that is an absolute fantastic point. You better believe in it. Like, you better have the passion for it, because you're absolutely right. I've been there. You hit that point of humiliation, and there's only one person that's going to pick you up off the ground in that moment, and it's you. So if you don't believe in it, you're not getting up.
That's right. And I tell you, I have found that when you see people taking risks or doing something that's difficult, generally they've got better people around them. I've been talking about this for a long time. This has been something that I've been passionate about. And, Rob and my wife finally said, knowing fully well like what the risks were and the fact that we have kids and all this, she said, look, put your money where your mouth is. If you've been talking about this. If you're going to do it, go do it. If we have to sell the house, look, we'll sell the house. We'll do what it takes, but go do it. And so you've got to make sure that you set the expectations with everyone around you, and that they're a part of it. If I hang back to your question, what advice would you give somebody with an idea? I would say go out and find the absolute best co-founder you can possibly find, and split everything down the middle and be 100% partners in the situation, and find somebody that has an opposite skill set of you but appreciates what your skill set is. And you need that kind of person around you, because, I've already been through 100 nights where I wouldn't have gone forward, and I'm sure there will be 100 more. And you need somebody to pull you out of that. So I think more advice would be to start right away and just begin making small accomplishments, and don't stop for anything, because you're going to find reasons along the way to stop. And you've got to evolve what you're doing. You just simply have to keep on going. And, I think that's the advice. I said it earlier, be very careful on who you let into your organization, particularly when you're in the strategy stage, because you're very vulnerable. And, there's going to be things that you don't think but you'll learn them. You'll certainly learn them when you have to.
That's great. And, jumping in on the co-founder comment, a great place to meet some of these folks who are thinking along the lines of improvement and change at our national meetings for ISHM or for CBSPD or ARM. Oftentimes that stroll through the vendor area is not just for a customer and a vendor relationship that's going to be built, but it really can be for, these are ideas, these are people who have passions, even outside of maybe the hospital they work for or the company that they're working for today. So I've always found it very beneficial to get to know those folks, get to know what's coming down the pipe, what's new this year, what's coming out next year, not, again, just for on the product side of things, but for the improvement, the opportunity to collaborate together and create something new, even if it's just like you said, being that person who is encouraging on the sidelines. Yes, somebody needs to do this. Please, someone get out there and fix this problem for us. I can't do it myself, but I know somebody else can. So that's a great point, Brian.
Yeah, the collaboration is extremely important. We joined an incubator, an office up in Chicago called Matter Health. And at any time you're in there, there's over 100 different young, from varying levels, but startup organizations in there. but there's a bunch of people that are committed to doing new things and driving new results. And so, there's an energy that comes along with that. And so being around that, you can thrive, you thrive, right? Because you can feel that energy. And so that's a really neat thing. And it's been great for learning and talking with other people and seeing what, people are doing in different parts of the industry, and just learning new things. And so it's really been a neat part of what we're doing, is being around that atmosphere when we are in the office and not traveling.
Brian, you mentioned automating processes that are extremely manual today, and that being a big value prop, I guess, for your company, but also, just finding opportunities when you're listening to the customer about helping them solve a problem. And one that you mention or reference, I guess, in the article that we talked about kicking off the interview from back in January, you talk about when a new surgeon comes on board, and regardless of how well it seems like it may get set up, the bells of urgency sound. I'll just quote it. The bells of urgency sound, the sales representative phone siren, and the process to beat the clock and be ready for scheduled surgical cases has begun. This is a perfect example of a reactive and manual process in need of digital transformation. So as we transition maybe to sort of the big data conversation in this interview, I thought no better place to start than that, because that is such a commonality in the sterile processing world today.
Yeah, how many times do you think it's happening each day?
Yeah,
where,
several.
The reps are pulling over on the side of the road because they're getting an urgent call that they've got to respond and accommodate to a new physician onboarding because surgery's happening in a couple of days. Hank, I'm sure you've gone through this.
Oh, never had that experience, no.
We absolutely, Justin, focused on that area because that's where a loss of data accuracy is occurring. A physician comes on, half of the team knows about it, one system is updated, the other systems are not updated, and you have a loss of data accuracy. The value and performance of your software systems begins to diminish, and that's happening everywhere. Hospitals are suffering from data drift. And so we did absolutely focus on working with hospitals to modernize that onboarding process, but also interoperability. We focus on making sure that all the current software systems in the hospital are harmonized and synchronized. So if data is changing in one of them, well, we can monitor that and make sure that the other ones are being updated.
Is that the big difference there, Brian, between the current instrument tracking systems that are on the market, full of instrument information? Is it just that they're not talking to these OR programs and thus the data is drifting away from them?
I think that there is a lot going on, right? I believe we mentioned earlier, you have sterile processing, you have the operating room, you have supply chain, you've got surgeons, you have suppliers. All these groups are responsible for getting the right instruments into the operating room. And there's a lot of things that are going on and a lot of people that require information. And a lot of our work, what it has done is it's enhanced the performance of those tracking systems, because when we push in accurate data, well, then that system's, obviously it's more functional. So what needs to occur is that you got to have data that reaches out beyond the sterile processing, because there's more people that are responsible. And when they have the right information, then you get real collaboration and co-employee engagement.
Well, and as you mentioned as well, it's not just the data drift that is the danger there with onboarding new physicians, but you can think about it as data obesity, if you will. The complexity of your data just gets bigger and bigger because there's no one person or funnel that's driving standardization or optimization when a new physician comes in. I'll give you a great example. I have seen multiple times in my experience, the surgeon shows up at the front door with a stack of his preference cards from the facility that he just came from, or a stack of the count sheets or recipes for the instrument trays, and he says, "This is what I need." And the question is rarely, well, that's great at what you need, but this is what we got. Can you use what we got, or does what we have even match maybe to a percentage of what you're comfortable with? Would you be willing to deal with some different variations to help us keep the standard model? So that data complexity just grows and grows and grows, and yeah, it drifts because the systems are not talking to each other. But I end up, as a sterile processing leader, sometimes at the mercy of the last facility across the street and whatever they have. That's what Dr. So-and-so wants now. So, yeah, a lot of the problems.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, one of the unique things is, Hank, that there's not a system that actually knows what instruments are required in surgery. And there's tribal knowledge from the nurses, right? But nobody's aggregating that. So by existing between these departments and being the pipes and working closely with the surgeons and the nurses, we now know what's needed, and we're aggregating that info. So as our data set grows, we can begin to benefit from coupling the instruments with other data sets like outcomes and efficiency metrics to finally measure the effect that the instruments are having on surgery. So we didn't build our system to look at a hospital or to look at a health system. We designed it to look at the entire industry, and we designed it to couple our information with outcome information and a variety of efficiency metrics, so that imagine that day when that surgeon's coming on board and we can say, look, as a starting point for your toolbox, let's use a mix of surgical instruments that are driving the absolute best outcomes, in this particular case. And then let's begin to tailor it to what your specific preferences are. And that's ultimately the end game. And that's where the big data part comes in, is when you're looking at the whole industry and you're pulling different data sets, large data sets together, consolidating it into one place and structuring it. And this is just something that cannot be achieved in Excel.
Yeah, amen. And, a lot of the instrument tracking systems out there are being underutilized with a lot of the just modules that are built into them and whatnot. And one scenario that Hank and I talked about before we got on the call was simply, a lot of times just setting this standardization amongst trays and all of the different, maybe it's not really a necessary deviation from the tray that's already there, but it has to do with the surgeon just not knowing the difference and saying, this is what I was always comfortable with. And then we tie that back to that urgency and that crunch time. And so we're not methodical and necessarily as thoughtful about setting up a new tray, and we give it a doctor's name, and really probably it's 99% a match with a tray that's already in inventory. And I always wondered, with the tracking systems, I know it would take a lot of cross-referencing from different, just basic pattern stainless steel manufacturers, but it would seem that you should be able to go into your inventory and compare or actually run some sort of an algorithm that would automatically compare instrument sets and see which ones are close matches, greater than 97%, and help somebody at the institution then sit down with maybe the team lead, the surgeon, and somebody from sterile processing and just take a look at it and be like, so the variation here is a 1/2 inch on a Mayo scissor, right? So maybe we can just make this all the same set and increase availability and productivity and make reordering easier as well.
So let's go back to a comment. Before I address that, let's go back to a comment you guys made about tracking systems. Software systems record actions and they record inputs. They don't solve problems. Informed people solve problems. And so you can't be focused on absolutely everything. And I believe the tracking systems are very clear about what they are providing. They're providing a tool to record activities and inputs, to help you to understand, based on your activities, where the tray is in the hospital, and based on your inputs, what your productivity of putting those trays together are. The unique thing about Ascendco is that we are data before software. So we're talking to a health system right now that approached us that is wanting to buy a market tracking system. And we believe that we understand, based on looking across the industry, what their path is. They're making the right decision to standardize around a tracking system. But how many systems do you guys know out there that are penetrated fully through a health system?
Yeah, not very many, Brian.
Right. So you get what happens is, these 10 hospitals come together and they'll rally around a software system. One will be budgeted for it, and they'll install a program. It will ultimately, become a sterile processing solution, so a partially utilized solution, because the data in it isn't accurate, because the data is not contributing to other departments' success. And it will be undervalued, and it'll be underutilized. And in a year, they will inevitably add a person into their budget to help maintain and sustain that data accuracy. That added cost will then limit that system from expanding throughout the other hospitals and make it more difficult for them to get budget approval. So what we're saying is that you can't be everything. And these systems are absolutely necessary as a result of regulations that are in the industry. You have to track and record things, and you have to be accountable for that. But you also have to be able to ensure you sustain data accuracy beyond a go live, and that information is contributing to other departments' success, so that you get full adoption and acceptance of a new system. So that's what we look at. And being a data company first, we have this relational database and this platform, Justin, to do exactly what you said, is to record, what we kind of call internally fuzzy crosses, and to change the perception of what optimization and standardization means. Let me tell you, if you run into an operating room and you say optimization, everybody will shut their doors and they will ignore you until you leave. But there's so much opportunity out there. I can assure you all, we are effectively removing instruments that nobody wants. There's no need to get rid of instruments that somebody actually needs, even the ones that they just need on a rainy day. It's not about taking away. It's about applying a very complex algorithm to minimize the flow, minimize the open, and minimize the purchases required to refresh your inventory that has just organically grown out of control for the last several decades.
So you have alluded, just then on the opportunity to remove instruments. So we're talking about some waste there. But overall, what opportunities are we missing by not delving in to our SPD and OR data as it relates to these trays? You've talked about onboarding, just getting at those instruments that everyone agrees shouldn't be there in the first place. What else is on the table there for the taking?
So utilization and standardization are massive opportunities, and the easiest place to focus, right? Hank, what would you think typical utilization rates are in a large hospital?
In terms of instruments in a tray?
Yep.
Oh, you're 30%, looking at
35.
Yep. I was going to be more specific than Justin and say 27%, but we can go with the range if you want to do that.
Yeah, definitely 29.9.
I will tell you, we've now probably done one of the most in-depth research studies. And one of the most shocking things to me was that the smaller, rural facilities really didn't have better utilization rates than a lot of the larger, facilities. Now, the academics from our studies have shown to have the lowest utilization rates, which makes sense, right? Because doctors are coming in and coming out. But we have found utilization rates as low as 9%, and we've found them as high as 42%.
Wow.
9%.
So, this has really been a process for us, but what we've now accomplished is we rely on technology. We understand that, with busy schedules, you can't expect to get 30 surgeons into a room. And so technology's changed that process for us. And now there's an element of learning that our system goes through. As we answer questions, it knows how to better answer future questions. And so it gets better at recommending what is needed and what isn't needed based on kind of historical data that we have in the system. And so that's accelerating the process, and it's making it very, very simple for us to go in and increase utilization rates significantly. Now, strategically, you're dealing with something well beyond just data and instruments. You're dealing with culture, right? And every department in the hospital has a different culture, especially, Justin, as you know from your past, especially the operating room. So we take very small steps to make sure that everyone is comfortable with the change that is occurring. And I think, I just speak to one of the things that seems to resonate more than anything that we can say outside of the data, outside of the platform, is when we walk in, we say, look, we have no opinions. And everybody in the past has had an opinion on what's needed in a tray or what's not. And we're just presenting the data so that the coordinators, the surgical techs can make informed decisions based on that information.
I want to throw something else at you too, Brian, in a follow-up, and maybe Hank needs to sound on this one as well. But when you talk about 9% utilization rates, from my experience too, that says something about what the instrument repair budget might look like as well, because a lot of times the sets are stocked with backups because they're concerned that this scissor won't be sharp, or maybe there's misalignment issues. And so sometimes that speaks to just the quality of the instrumentation and how proactively it's being maintained. And I don't know if that's, I don't know what size of how responsible that scenario is for having like low utilization such as 9%, but I kind of wanted to get your sense of it and get Hank's sense of it as well.
Hank, you want to take a stab at that first?
Sure, yeah. So when I heard 9%, I'm thinking 91% productivity, 91% extra chemicals and utilities, 91% repair cost on unused items that are being shuffled, taken out, taken in, transported, jumbled over the elevator downstairs into the department, 91% more time inspecting, checking, testing, repackaging, or re-sterilizing, waste. That's what I hear when I hear 91%. When I hear 9%, and I know that's worst case scenario there, but I was glad that you brought up the culture there of understanding and not being afraid of the O word for optimization. And that was just the waste that we're talking about downstairs in SPD, but when you start talking waste in the OR for counting these instruments before and after the procedure, for setting up, we'll say 91 other instruments in a 100 instrument tray, huge amounts of movement waste and labor waste and supply waste. I just can't I can't imagine when an OR staff would be confronted with this data that they could walk away unmoved.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And, I think that it somehow has been a black hole and it's gone under the radar. And who knows? I mean, how interesting will it be when we're able to eventually look at the gained focus that there can be in an operating room when, you're not counting 600 surgical instruments, right, before and after, or multiple times throughout a case. So there's so much that can come of this, and we're literally, just getting started with it. And so we're just scratching the surface. But it's been so reassuring to see the impact, to see our process really working, and to see the surgeons and the nurses and coordinators be fully on board and supportive and gain confidence in what we're doing. That's been the greatest thing, because it has single-handedly been the most difficult thing we've tried to accomplish.
So, Brian, you bring up the surgeons there. Do you think that most surgeons know or are thinking about the impact that sterile processing data has on the availability of their instruments or the quality of their instruments?
No, but I think the good ones have an idea. I remember, you know that I spent quite a bit of time down in your neck of the woods, right, in San Antonio.
Yep.
There, I worked with a friend whose son had a hernia, and he asked me to recommend a doctor. And there's a doctor in that area. His name's Dr. Baldwin, and he stuck out, and I recommended him because I would see him come down in the sterile processing almost every time I was visiting this particular facility. And he was coming down there to watch his instruments go through the process. And, my perception of this was, I don't think it was because he didn't trust the sterile processing. I think it was because he considered this a part of the patient care. He was the first guy that I met when I was young, coming into the industry, that really taught me the importance of surgeon preference. He had a very, very specific reason for every single instrument that he used, for the balance. And he was able to explain and articulate, why the balance made a difference. And that's the kind of guy you want operating on you, right? He knew it. He got it. And I've seen that to a certain extent, as I've, kind of lived out my 15 years in the industry. But boy, Dr. Baldwin always stood out, and he set the bar pretty high.
Well, that's a great point that you make there, Brian, is the object to move toward optimizing sets or standardizing trays is not to remove the importance of surgeon preference. It's actually to give more room for it so that it's not needless complexity that's not even a preference, so that now your tray is so overloaded or your preference card has so many extra instruments that are not even required or wanted by the physician. But if you can clean out that waste and then actually give them what they need, what they want for those procedures, and then utilize those assets elsewhere in the service lines, I mean, that's a match made in heaven. So I want to start wrapping up our interview with you today, but I did have one more question to kind of bring this home for sterile processing leaders who are sitting here or driving to work listening to the show, and they're wondering, okay, I'm convinced I need to get my hands on some actionable data. How do I start the process? Are there particular departments or are there roles in facilities that are more receptive to this idea that sterile processing has got to have some investment in data?
Yep. Well, I will say we have found a lot of success where there is a merger between a clinical background, and someone looking at the operating room also as a business. So we found success there. But I don't think it's about the title or the position, the person. It's interesting. Have you ever seen that typical adoption curve for how people buy new products? Have either of you guys seen that before?
I don't think I've seen that.
I don't believe I have either.
On the left, it'll show like 2 to 3% of people are innovators. Then it will show, 5 to something percent are early adopters of new products. I've always looked at that through my career to see, what's the process of the way new products are accepted into a market. And I think there's a simpler way to explain it. I think there's 3 kinds of people. There's people that are influenced by ideas, people that are influenced by the market, and people that are influenced by direction. And the idea people are generally the thought leaders. They know what they want to accomplish, and they know what they need and don't have to get to where they want to go. And this is where, as I mentioned earlier, we focus our efforts because, we're looked at as a tool to get things done faster. But there's people that are influenced by the market, and the market people look around them to see what others are doing and driving results. So they generally won't act until at least, 2 to 3 sides around their building are already doing it. And then there's the people that are influenced by direction. The direction people, they're focused on enhancing what they're already doing and don't have interest to try something new until the idea or market people are forcing them to do it, right?
Yeah.
And so much of healthcare is caught in that category because there's no margin for error and there's already so many things going on. So I think it's not about the title. It's about recognizing who you're talking to and seeking out the idea people and saying, look, these instruments, this complex asset has been delegated to us, to me. I'm responsible for managing it, and I am the most critical support function of this operating room. I simply require the same level of data and information that every other critical department in this hospital already has, and I'm flying blind. When it comes to, beyond where my instrument trays are, when it comes to what I have, what the conflicts are, when it comes to measuring productivity beyond just volume, but actual financial metrics, when it comes to objectively saying, here is the cost of growth, here's the cost of adding on procedures, here's the associated inventory that must come along with that, this sort of information will elevate sterile processing. It will give them a seat at that table. That is my belief, and that's our aim, where we have a seat at the table to say, look, this is what's needed to better support the operating room. And in turn, everybody benefits, because if we can reduce some of this unnecessary variation that is occurring in the operating room, then we can also simplify the surgical preparation process. We can better align departments and make it an easier process to get ready for surgery. And that's what it's all about.
Yeah, Brian, that's an excellent vision. And it's funny too, a couple of things. One, the fact that you talk about interoperability, especially with the software. How ironic is it that, the different departments, when you talk about facilities operating in silos, that they don't. The technology itself, by not having them talk to each other, perpetuates that problem. And then the other thing was the new product adoption curve that you talked about. I'd never seen the curve before, but when you began to explain it, I remember the themes from Malcolm Gladwell's book, The Tipping Point, where you were talking about guys who were motivated by ideas, and it really related to that, especially that descriptor in the book. But I want to thank you very much for spending some time with us. It's really our second show, and we're hitting home runs because of Hank's network of not only great minds, but you're a great interview. You talk well, and you're really able to lay out, like I said, your vision. So we appreciate you sharing your insight and your success with us and our listeners today.
Well, thank you, and hats off to you guys. I'm honored to be a part of it, and I love what you're creating. So I wish you guys all the best, and glad, again, that I could just be a part of it.
All right, thanks, Brian.
All right, that's Brian Reed, everyone, co-founder and CEO at Ascendco Health. And we talked to him about a number of good topics, obviously focusing mostly on startups and getting it off the ground, as well as utilizing big data in the sterile processing world. The thing that really rung true to me, Hank, just having been part of a couple of startups myself in various industries, what he said I thought was the most important was talking about how in that environment, it's not only your job, but it's critical to your success to be listening to customers. And then when you're thinking about getting engaged, be honest with yourself about the why, because you will face humiliation. And the whole partnership piece about having a co-founder that has a different skill set, but somebody that you have a relationship with enough that you're both appreciating those differing talents and skill sets of each other. And I think that really is, to me, and having done it a few times, it is critical. You don't want to have somebody that's exactly the same as you, because then you don't bring enough to the table. At the same time, people that don't necessarily have the same viewpoints may struggle to get along. And so that's when you find a mutual respect for differing skill sets, I think that's really a recipe for success. And he was very smart and very wise to note that.
Yeah, as I was listening to him discuss that co-founder relationship, I was thinking about my own department and the interplay between leaders in departments, managers, directors, supervisors, and the huge importance there to get folks who don't think just like you and whose skill set are not exactly yours. Because just like a startup, your department needs that collaboration and that creativity to improve itself. One of the things that stuck out to me was his discussion about surgeon onboarding and the importance that big data can play in just smoothing out that process, changing it from the status quo of the facility across the street or across the state that the surgeon's coming from and says, hey, here are my preference cards and these are the trays. This is what I want, to really making that a great experience for the surgeon, that maybe we can take that opportunity to look at what he's using and say, can we do this better? And then also for the facility, can we do it in a more standardized and optimized fashion to save our labor, our time, our supplies as well. So yeah, that hit home for sure.
Yeah, and talking about that big data, you can gather a ton of it. You know, there's tracking systems, there's all kinds of ways to capture the data. But another really great point that he made was that informed people solve the problems. So you can collect all the data you want, and you can have lots of big data, but you don't necessarily have lots of proof or actionable items if the data isn't valid because it's not collected properly, or you don't have the people to notice that that's happening, correct the issue, and collect the right kind of data and make it usable. So I thought that was, you know, if there was a real quotable line, it was definitely informed people solve problems. I love that one.
Where that comes to play, as he brought forward, is so many of these facilities and systems out there, they're merging, they're picking up new smaller facilities, or they're growing in their market. And oftentimes that's like bringing two families together that have different languages and different cultures, and you're trying to make them work together, but the data is not being integrated. The trays are being called different things. They have different amounts of instruments in them, and it creates all kinds of complexity for sterile processing and the OR teams, all kinds of service breakdowns. So not that there's not other facilities out there who could benefit from big data management, but definitely if you're undergoing or you're about to undergo those kind of mergers, I would highly advise looking into how to fix and clean up your data before that happens.
Well, that puts another great show in the books, Hank. I'm really enjoying doing this with you. And a reminder for all of our listeners, you can support our show and what we're doing here by subscribing to Beyond Clean on iTunes and Stitcher. We'd certainly appreciate a rating and a review because your feedback is important to us. Thank you again for listening to another edition of Beyond Clean.